presenting in hospitals, for example, and the cost on the medical system.
Just before we get into our panellists on this particular topic, what can we as individuals or as a country do about this modern day, or the sad reality of modern life, to quote Theresa May, Nigel?
Yeah, that's a good quote, isn't it? So connection is really important. We all need connection. We need to belong. We need to have people where we feel deeply connected and understood. So there's just making that connection to people, going out of our way to connect with others, not stigmatising and blaming those people who might be experiencing loneliness. That stops people really from sharing that they're lonely. We can be in a crowd, we can be in our families, we can be partnered and still feel lonely.
Yeah.
And for us to understand that is really important, that it's not unusual or means there's something wrong with that person. It's just, a part of our society of reaching out and being involved with one another like we used to be, really.
Yeah, like we used to be. Hey, Nigel Pettini, counsellor, educator at Unitec, counsellor for 20 years. Nigel, thank you. Marmari, you first. It's profoundly sad, isn't it, to hear that 200,000 people in New Zealand might go a month without having a conversation with a relative or a friend.
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine who she's a local priest at a local church in Newlands, and what she does, she doesn't tend to stand at the pulpit very much. She's a very humble and quiet lady. She's in her 60s, and she just goes and visits people. She knocks on doors at the flats at the back of our community centre, and she asks if people are hungry, and she takes them food. And that kind of outreach, that kind of conversation that she enters into, just in a very humble and quiet way, I just think that's transformative, or potentially transformative for those people who come in contact with her. And that's some of what we're seeing, I think, is because of some of those social institutions, and church just being one of those, but there's lots of other social institutions too, where people would know who you were, where you lived, what you did. So I think, not that I'm not one to say, it used to be great in the good old days. I'm not one of those people at all. But I think we do kind of have to be mindful of each other.
Yeah, that's probably breaking someone's loneliness is as easy as basically just checking how they are, leaning over the fence and saying,
good
how
point.
Are you going? Because, your neighbour lives alone or something like that. And, that breaking up their day with a bit of connection is huge.
Don't you find it ironic, and here you are as CEO of NetSafe, that in an age where we've never been more connected, I can know what my friends are doing in Tokyo or Lisbon. Yep. We're so connected, and yet we are so alone. Well, the irony is extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. And I guess the thing with social media is that most of the time people are broadcasting information about themselves, not actually connecting with you on social media. They're not having a meaningful, conversation. They're not talking and asking. They're just telling you what's going on. So all of that information is not actually connecting and breaking down loneliness. And then people who are disconnected from their family, social media is probably only going to rub that in, because they're going to see a whole lot of stuff going on they're not part of.
Well, as an antidote to that, Marmari, I'm going to take a weekend off, go to the beach with my little 60-month-old and take a walk along the beach with little Wallace Jr. How about that?
Fantastic.
Perfect.
You have been a wonderful panel, Marmari Stevens and Martin Cocker. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Julie for the week.
Thank you.
And see you bright and early, 3:45 p.m. on Monday. See ya.
Kia ora.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, Auckland Council green lights limes return to the streets, but there are some riders, and by that we mean a list of conditions. We'll give you the rundown. The Department of Conservation fought for a year to keep this from you. Transcripts of intelligence gathered by private investigators and shared over locked chat channels on a messaging app. Who were they snooping on? The dramatic pictures of a seaplane's botched landing in the Waitemata Harbour, and Pacific rugby players tackle plans to squeeze them out of a new elite competition. And it is costing charities thousands to get rid of the trash that some donors think is treasure. We're everywhere. Check us out on Sky Channel 83. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Lime will have to agree to stricter terms for a trial licence before its e-scooters return to Auckland streets. Auckland Council has lifted its trading suspension on the scooter hire company after it fixed a glitch that caused random locking up of the brakes. The council's spokesperson Dean Kimpton says Lime has owned up to the extent of its braking problem.
We received a full list of all incidents in Auckland, injury and non-injury related. Is it related to the sudden braking issue? There was approximately 155 across New Zealand, about 90 in Auckland, 30 of which translated or resulted in injury to riders.
Dean Kimpton says Lime has verbally agreed to stricter rules but will have to confirm in writing. The electric scooters could be back on Auckland streets as early as tomorrow. Canterbury's police superintendent says his frontline officers are carrying pistols in response to a specific situation, and it's not a new approach. Police officers in Christchurch will be carrying firearms in holsters until a wanted man is arrested or hands himself in. Katie Todd reports.
The man is wanted in relation to 2 armed attacks in the district on Saturday and Tuesday. Police officers were shot at from the window of a car before exchanging shots with another wanted man in a Christchurch street. That man is in custody. The district commander, Superintendent John Price, says as soon as the risk is removed, officers will revert to normal firearm protocols. He says it is public knowledge that firearms are already routinely available to staff, and yesterday's decision was in response to a very specific situation. Mr. Price is appealing for the man to turn himself in, or the police will release his name and details. In Christchurch, ko Katie Todd, tēnei.
Ferry passengers looked on in horror as they watched a seaplane crash into Auckland's Waitemata harbour. The pilot managed to escape from the cockpit after the plane ended up upside down in the water. Stuart McNaull was on the West Harbour ferry watching the plane come into land when he noticed its wheels weren't down.
It touched the water like you would normally expect. There was a lot of spray, and it just, I guess it bogged. And as it bogged, it just cartwheeled over. Kind of reminded me of the America's Cup when the boat. It was that kind of slow motion effect. The plane just going slowly over onto its back, I guess.
Stuart McNaull, who saw the float plane crash into the harbour. The company that owns the de Havilland Beaver, Auckland Seaplane, says it's suspended its flight operations. It's working with the Civil Aviation Authority to investigate what happened. The man accused of scamming millions of dollars from a group of Chinese workers says he has done nothing wrong. Peter, or Wenshan Lee, is being investigated by Immigration New Zealand after about 50 Chinese construction workers complained. They say they paid tens of thousands of dollars to Mr. Lee for a work visa but did not get the work or pay they were promised. Mr. Lee denies the allegations. His lawyer, Adam Simpringham, says Mr. Lee has filed a statement to the Employment Relations Authority. Subcontractors say they're the ones who will take the hit with construction company Arrow International getting into financial trouble. The company announced yesterday it has gone into voluntary receivership. The managing director of Smith Crane and Construction, Tim Smith, says he's worked for a few companies that have gone under. He has 4 cranes on 3 different Arrow sites, 1 in Wellington and 2 in Auckland. He says he's lost about $5 million over about 8 years.
Obviously, all those contractors, we all become more suspicious and more risk adverse. We've got a choice to make whether we insist on payment bonds and that sort of thing. But in a competitive industry, quite often that if you seek those or demand those, all they do is say, "Hey, we don't want you. We'll go to the guy that's prepared to take the risk."
Tim Smith says the industry is badly structured. Another Queensland fruit fly has been found on Auckland's North Shore, resulting in further restrictions on the movement of fruit and vegetables. The male fly was discovered in a trap just outside the Zone A controlled area, but within Zone B in Northcote. Katie Doyle reports.
This is the 3rd time the species has been found in Northcote. It was about 270 metres away from the last detection there. The Ministry for Primary Industries says while the find is disappointing, it does show the effectiveness of the surveillance program. Its biosecurity spokesperson, Catherine Duthie, says there is still no evidence of an established breeding population. Dr Duthie says it's important people in the affected zones keep up to date with the latest information so they adhere to movement restrictions on produce. Ko Katie Doyle, tēnei.
A preschooler from Rangiora has become the 5th person to contract measles in Canterbury this week. The District Health Board confirmed the case this afternoon after confirming an outbreak of the highly contagious disease in the region on Tuesday. 4 other people from Rangiora and 1 from Christchurch have contracted the highly contagious disease. None were immunised against it. Dunedin's Deputy Mayor Chris Staines hopes the official opening of the city's separated cycleway marks the end of rising tensions between motorists and cyclists. The contentious $8 million project runs along Central and North Dunedin's state highway system. The change was needed after the deaths of cyclists on the road in 2011 and 2012. Mr Staines says the lack of growth has meant motorists have been able to travel unimpeded for years, but growth is now gripping the city. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 5. Centuries to Jeet Raval and Tom Latham have put New Zealand in a commanding position in the first cricket test against Bangladesh in Hamilton. Raval scored his maiden test century, making 132, as he and Latham, who made 161, put on 254 for the opening stand. A short time ago, the Black Caps were 352 for 3, giving them a 118-run first innings lead. New Zealand rugby boss Steve Tew says the release of details surrounding a proposed World League means any new competition is now further away from coming to fruition. The competition would involve 12 teams made up of the 4 rugby championship teams, along with Japan and the United States, and the 6 nations teams in a round-robin competition. It would not include any Pacific nations. Tew says the proposal has drawbacks as far as New Zealand is concerned, but is one of several World Rugby has been considering, although all will involve compromise.
Probably further away today than we were 48 hours ago, simply because we've ended up with a debate in the public arena that's not completely fully informed and doesn't give everybody a chance to share their views. So it's not our way to be having these discussions in the media until we've got some point where we can. Can we get this across the line? I'm not sure, but we've got plenty of work going on other considerations.
Steve Tew. Meanwhile, in Super Rugby tonight, the Hurricanes play the ACT Brumbies in Palmerston North. Australian golfer Zach Murray has a 2-shot lead in the New Zealand Open at Queenstown. Murray is 12 under par with 8 holes to play in his second round. Wired up as Harry Bateman is the best placed of the New Zealanders. He's completed his second round to sit at 9 under. Michael Campbell shot a 2 over par second round and will miss the cut. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life visits one of the 4 remaining orchards in the Auckland district that hasn't succumbed to urban sprawl. SJD is this week's Friday Night Live act, recorded at the Mercury Theatre, and the chemist Richard Hartshorn introduces this week's element, cobalt, which in turn, given its blue hue, has inspired a sonic tonic dedicated to paint, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For all of the North Island except Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, fine in most places but a few areas of cloud and isolated showers about Northland. For Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods, showers developing tomorrow morning, then becoming isolated in the evening. All of the South Island except Clutha, Southland and Southern Fiordland, fine, but some cloudy periods about eastern areas tomorrow. For Clutha, Southland and Southern Fiordland, a few showers today, especially about the coast, mainly fine tomorrow. At the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 5 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. It's a green light for Lime scooters to get back on Auckland streets, but there's a few riders, including reporting serious accidents to council within 24 hours and weekly maintenance inspections on every scooter. Now, Lime has to formally sign up to the conditions and can't relaunch until it does. And just a couple of minutes ago, we checked with council and they haven't yet signed on the dotted line. Also, the company that was suspended over its safety record is now going to be an ambassador for safety and education. So how does that work? Dean Kimpton is Auckland Council's Chief Operating Officer. This afternoon I spoke to him about Lime's new obligations. But first I wanted to clear up what information Lime had handed over and when it first knew there was a problem.
We received a full list of all incidents in Auckland, injury and non-injury related. Is it related to the sudden braking issue?
And how many was that?
There was approximately 155 across New Zealand, about 90 in Auckland, 30 of which resulted in injury to riders.
When was the earliest incident that they have recorded?
In the second half of October. I don't have the exact date in mind, but second half of October.
What do you make of that?
Towards the licence period.
Okay, so second part of October. What do you make of that, given one of the executives came out this week saying they'd only known about the problem for a few weeks?
I think we're all disappointed that they didn't understand it early on or didn't see the signs of a potential issue earlier than what they did. And I've also reiterated to them our disappointment that we learned about this through the media. We require them to report to us more regularly. That subject's been discussed with them, and I know it's certainly been a topic in the media, and they've undertaken to address that, and certainly our new requirements demand of them the same, reporting on a 48-hour basis.
Okay, so their public comments, though, are miles apart from the actual reality that we have seen. So how can you trust them?
Look, all I can say is that we're disappointed in their communication with us. We have addressed the issue as soon as we became aware of it, which was in the middle of February. And a week later, we suspended their licence.
But what about them? What about them? Because that's the question. How you can trust them to play by the rules when they're publicly saying one thing, that they've only known for a few weeks, when the reality shows that they have known for months?
Look, my view around Lime is that from now on, they're very clear that we will suspend their licence if we get, and we'll do it again, if we get a repeat of these sorts of issues. So my focus now is we have put a line in the sand, we've suspended them once. We would suspend any other operator, including Lime, if we get a repeat of these sorts of issues where we're not getting quality of information and we're not addressing product or public safety. So going forward, we're very clear, and I think the market is very clear what our position is as well.
Let's consider some of these conditions. So they have to escalate within 24 hours, and by that you mean report back to you to tell you if there are serious or significant safety incidences. What do you mean by significant or serious safety incidences?
So we're after two things here. One is if there is an incident where a person is seriously injured, maybe requiring hospitalisation, then we're going to leave it to them in their discretion what the exact threshold is. We expect to be notified.
Really? You're going to leave it to them? Given everything that we've discussed, you're going to leave that to their discretion?
Absolutely, because they're required to. If they want to hold a licence, they're going to have to report along these lines. And they're quite clear we do not want to hear about it through the media. Secondly, we've also said that we want them to report to us within 48 hours where there is a significant safety or a significant operating issue in their fleet outside of Auckland, including globally, because we want to understand how they're taking those events and building them into safe practice here in Auckland and therefore New Zealand.
Dean, have they been relying on people self-reporting incidents, or is there some other more sophisticated mechanism for them to track the brake fault in particular?
Look, to my understanding, I'm not the expert on their scooter. There's two sources. One is there is the operator and any complaints or observations that they file having ridden a scooter. And they have a diagnostic tool that allows them to interrogate the control unit on the Lime scooter. And so they will take the individual rider's feedback and they'll combine that with the diagnostic feedback from the control unit on the scooter, and they'll form a view of what's actually happened. And we have got visibility into those reports.
Okay, so you're getting fortnightly reports now from the audit company, well, what is in essence the audit company. This is Exponent. Why do you need continued fortnightly reports? What are you missing?
What we've asked for is that Exponent is going to continue to monitor the performance of the scooters. This is at Lime's discretion. Continue to monitor the scooters, consider issues as they arise, and advise on fixes for those issues. And you would expect that of any company that's wanting to operate with good or best practice.
So Exponent, sorry to interrupt, but sorry, Dean.
Certainly.
Exponent is being paid for by who during this process?
Lime.
Are they independent? Exponent?
So our view is we've asked them to write to us and give us assurance as independent advisor to Lime, but be aware, and there's also another condition on Lime, that Auckland Council and Auckland Transport appointed their own independent advisor. And we're going through the process of doing that. We expect to have that person appointed either by close of business today or on Monday. They will look at all the information both Exponent and Lime have provided. They will look at local operations and they will report back to us on their findings. And we expect to build that feedback into our expectations through the code of practice and, if required, specifically back to Lime.
Also, you are requiring Lime to improve its so-called ambassador program. So this is 10 people working 7 days, across 7 days a week at specific times, educating scooter riders. I mean, how's that work? 10 people over 7 days? You barely get one person on at any given time, would you?
Well, the intention is that we have at least 3 specific times each day, and there's 10 people working each day. It's not 10 people spread over 7 days.
Right, 10 people every day. And what do you anticipate that they will be doing? Stopping riders who are, for example, under the age of 18, because they're not supposed to be on the scooters. Do you expect them to be policing activities that shouldn't be happening?
So our expectation will be along those lines. Also, they have to be careful about their legal jurisdiction, but certainly there's a rider user agreement. So if they identify riders that aren't complying with those, then they're entitled, if Lime's given them that jurisdiction, to ask those riders to get off.
So in
essence, riders are riding unsafely, then we expect them to get them off. But we're also requiring those ambassadors to make sure they're out there educating and supporting the public in safe riding, and that both rider behaviour, but also where they ride and how they ride.
Okay, so they're basically the Lime police.
That's not my expression. We're calling them Lime ambassadors.
But they are there to police behaviour.
They're there to reinforce the safety obligations and use practice. I wouldn't want to call them Lime police. That's not my expression. They're ambassadors for safety and education.
And that's Dean Kimpton from Auckland Council there talking about Lime's, licence to operate being reinstated as long as they meet these conditions. After months of resisting, the Department of Conservation has been forced to release pages and pages of secret chat room conversations with the security company Thompson and Clark. The private investigators were spying on anti-1080 activists for DOC and sharing the information through hidden channels on the messaging app Slack. The intel was costing nearly $4,000 a month. Last year, a report into government agencies' use of Thompson and Clark found that the security company may have illegally recorded private conversations while working for Southern Response Earthquake Services. Now, as for the Conservation Department, Thompson and Clark threatened to pull its services if DOC released the secret conversations on the Slack messaging service to RNZ. But the Ombudsman has now forced them to hand the transcripts over to us.
It's pages and pages of tight, tiny type. So small you have to zoom in about 200% to read their secret messages. DOC and Thompson and Clark would have preferred they stayed invisible. There's 47 pages of back and forth between them.
It's very concerning, but more concerning is the fact that we were not able to access that information.
On and off, the group chats included DOC's Director of Safety, Harry Marr, Thompson and Clark Director, Gavin Clark, and someone operating under the handle Natex. Each conversation has a title. One example, open source capture related to aerial operations on the Coromandel. Date, 30th September 2017, time 16:12. It's followed by line after line of information about the movements and thoughts of 1080 activists, all hoovered off social media, group Facebook pages, chat forums and the like. They were snooping around Rangatike Environmental Health Watch, Marlborough Deer Stalkers and Stop Poisoning Coromandel Peninsula, Fish and Hunt Forum, and this woman, who's none too pleased.
I've fought 1080 poison for some years. I was on the executive of the Ban 1080 Party. I'm an admin on 2 of the larger anti-1080 Facebook groups, and I have my own personal page which is basically committed to fighting 1080.
The channel, set up via the messaging app Slack, was accessible by 3 Thompson & Clark staff and 3 DOC staff. DOC specifically requested the information shared in it not be included in its monthly situation report. The names of a number of individuals being monitored are blanked out, but not all. They refer to people's partners, flag up clashes and potential future protests, and provide a précis of what's being talked about. There's comments too.
Lives in Wanaka, but appears to be sent images from other activists from around the country for her to publish and comment about. She appears to be acting as a de facto propagandist for the anti-1080 movement.
So this is how they want to portray anti-1080 people to the general public, and it's part of their propaganda. So it's projection when they call us propagandists.
In March last year, there's a discussion about another person they're monitoring.
He appears paranoid and arguably suffering from mental health issues.
And situation reports.
Continues to target DOC intern.
DOC wouldn't be interviewed today, but in a letter said Thompson & Clark was helping it develop a security policy, and staff and contractors had faced repeated intimidation, including threats to kill during 1080 protests.
Have you ever threatened any DOC staff?
Never.
Would you consider yourself in any capacity to be a threat to the security of DOC staff?
Not in any capacity.
It says the material shared in this locked, hidden chat channel was open source, meaning it was publicly accessible. And DOC says it never asked Thompson & Clark to do surveillance on any individual or group or to harvest their private data.
I think that most of us who are fighting 1080 hard have just come to realise that we now live in a country where we will be spied on if we are doing anything that goes against the government programs, no matter how benign or we are as people.
It's been a year since Checkpoint asked for these conversations to be released. DOC refused to give them up, saying it could lead to their staff being harassed and may drive the conversations they were monitoring underground. But behind the scenes, Thompson & Clark was pulling the strings. It warned DOC it was unlikely to continue providing the information if it couldn't have confidence that it could be withheld from the likes of Checkpoint. And it gave advice on how to avoid releasing it.
That's what we've come to expect from the Department of Conservation.
What is?
Well, this kind of obfuscation and doublespeak.
In the end, the Ombudsman forced these documents into the open, saying there was no real or substantial risk of harm to DOC staff if it was released.
Now, DOC has said it terminated its contract with Thompson & Clark last year, and as mentioned, DOC declined to be interviewed, but confirmed to Checkpoint that Harry Marr is still a DOC employee and had access to the Slack channel, as did 2 other members of DOC staff, but they won't say who those people were. Now, if you want to check out, if you were one of the people they were snooping around on in their closed messaging forum, we are posting all the pages released to us on our website so that you can scroll through them. And in another related story, following the investigation into government agencies using Thompson & Clark, a complaint was sent by the State Services Commission to the police. It has come out into the open today that the police have done nothing to investigate that complaint to date, and the Deputy Commissioner Mike Clement has released a statement saying, "I failed to action the investigation when the request came from the State Services Commission on 18 December. I make no excuses and I take full responsibility. I have now rectified that and the matter has been referred for immediate action." It is 23 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback as always, so do text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. High-profile rugby players around the world have spoken out against proposed plans for a new international competition that shuts out Pacific teams. World Rugby wants a coordinated international schedule every year, but the tournament won't allow for relegation and promotion, and not one Pacific team appears to have made the cut. Critics are warning that plan would kill off their development, their chances to compete, and ultimately the future of Pacific rugby. Alex Perrottet reports.
Ireland's Johnny Sexton says the plans are out of touch and could harm player welfare, while back in New Zealand, Kieran Reid says the quality of rugby could drop with fatigued players falling victim to commercial interests. Those interests are said to be pushed by an unnamed broadcaster who's tabled a television rights proposal which could be worth an extra 13 million New Zealand dollars for each country involved. But that's part of the catch. The Pacific nations are not involved, not in this proposal. The CEO of Samoa Rugby Union Whaelo Mavainga, Vincent Fepuleai, says it's a retrograde plan.
If we get shut out of a promotion relegation system for the next 12 years, as what has been reported, it will actually just make us like a nursery union. Players will be siphoned off overseas to clubs and eventually lose them to the bigger and richer unions.
Former Tongan flanker Hale Te Pole is the chairman of Pacific Rugby Players Association and says the players were devastated to hear the plans are in the works.
All the players, they're frustrated as we are. We weren't informed of these decisions. We knew about it last November. There might be something that comes out like this, but until late last week and early this weekend, that they were trying to push it to get confirmed by next month, and it was just like hit us right on the face.
The 12 teams proposed to be included are the European Six Nations, the big 3 Southern Hemisphere teams of New Zealand, Australia and South Africa, plus Argentina, Japan and the United States. Fiji, currently 9th in the world, is overlooked in favour of lower-ranked but more cashed-up countries. Deacon Manu is a former Fijian rugby player and also on the Pacific Rugby Players Group, and currently coaching St Andrew's College in Christchurch. He says the system is just another way to punish countries that for years have punched above their weight and fought hard for recognition.
It's heartbreaking. For the 12 years, not being able to get up there, that promotion relegation, I guess if you want to call it, how can you sort of increase your ranking and percentages if you're outside that window? There's only that World Cup option where you have a go at the top-rated teams, and that's just highly frustrating, and I know it'll turn a lot of players away because all they want to do is play for their country at the biggest stage.
Samoa's Whaelo Mavainga says it's a huge knockback, and he thinks Australia and New Zealand should be fighting in their corner at the World Rugby table. The CEO of New Zealand Rugby, Steve Chu, says it's one of a number of options, and he's already aired concerns about sidelining the Pacific teams.
And had some flaws in it, which we had pointed out, and we're going to be worked through. But all of the concepts that we've seen, all of the iterations, have got some bits of them that are not 100% perfect. And we will, if we are going to end up with something, have to make some compromises somewhere.
Steve Chu says New Zealand's position is that there must be a pathway for Pacific teams to get into the big competitions, but to use his words, when they are ready. But Deacon Manu says he needs to hear more from the regional heavyweights like Steve Chu and Australian Rugby Union CEO Raylene Castle.
To have, the heads of the rugby unions really backing the Pacific Islands, that's crucial. And we need that support to really drive things forward.
Raylene Castle couldn't be reached for comment. Steve Chu says if nothing else, the backlash has generated interest with potential broadcasters, and that's a good thing. And he applauds World Rugby for getting on the front foot. He says conditions are hard for all rugby nations to grow their revenue and hold on to talent. But Whaelo Mavainga says revenue might be taking too prominent a place in the decision-making, and there's a simple message from the Pacific.
Consider the merits of performance and the rankings that it is at the moment, and not just solely on the commercial aspect of it.
The CEO of Fiji Rugby Union, John O'Connor, says he's aware of the range of options but hasn't had any official word from World Rugby. He says he won't comment until he does hear from them. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
So how will the proposed plan impact Pacific Rugby? Our rugby reporter Joe Porter spoke to me from Japan and didn't mince his words. He says the World League plan is purely about money.
There's no other explanation. Fiji can be rightly pissed off. They are in the top 10 of the rankings, ahead of the USA, ahead of Japan, they're ahead of a lot of sides. So, they can be, it'll be the death of Pacific Rugby, I imagine. It's an absolute crying shame. And we already have enough Pacific players playing for other nations because it's simply a better career option and they have more exposure and earn more money. Well, this will just completely exacerbate that problem. So it's a real shame for Fiji, and it is all about the money. New Zealand Rugby have for some time now known that the future and the current state is never going to work for them. They're not making enough money. It's not working for them. They're not being able to leverage off their brand as the best team in the world enough. and they simply need more money. And I guess the NZR know that their future was looking a little bit dodgy if something didn't crop up. So yes, it seems to be all about the money. The NZR will be laughing all the way to the bank, but it's not good for world rugby, and it's not good for the Tier 2 nations, and it's not good for developing rugby in the Pacific nations whatsoever.
So in terms of those Pacific nations then, if you can't get to the top league if you're playing for your country, what do you think the consequences of that is going to be?
Well, I think the consequence of that will be just being simply that an even greater export of Pacific players to other countries. We see a lot of Pacific Islanders playing for Japan already, for the United States, of course, for the All Blacks, the Wallabies, Ireland. They're all over the world now, and it will just make that even more of a problem. So we'll just get the top players from the islands will simply head overseas. They won't put their allegiance to their own country because they know there's no future in it, there's no money in it. It'll be a struggle for those unions even to get regular games and fixtures, and they'll simply end up playing for another country. You'll see a lot of Polynesian names in the Irish side, even more in the Scottish team, even more in the Welsh and the English team. Of course, there's always lots in the All Blacks and the Wallabies. You'll probably see them popping up in all kinds of countries, Japan, Argentina, the United States. So I imagine it'll essentially make the Polynesian player into a mercenary, and that's not their own fault, and they'll end up having to go and play for other countries simply to keep their careers alive, which is a crying shame because they're very proud of their heritage and where they come from, and this is a real kick in the teeth to those Pacific nations who provide so much for rugby around the world.
So is it incumbent on the likes of Australia and New Zealand then to stand up and say to World Rugby, hang on a minute, this doesn't seem that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the moral thing to do. However, money talks, and that's what this essentially boils down to. And New Zealand are always going to look after their own interests, as are Australia, before anyone else's. They might say they look to develop and help rugby in other parts of the world, but I'm afraid that talk of growing the game internationally is really just doing sort of lip service. What they're worried about is their financial future, and they can see some security in this new World League. This can be seen as them turning a blind eye to their Pacific brothers.
So you're obviously in Japan at the moment. World Rugby Cup kicks off in September. This is going to be the first tournament in Asia, and until recent years, Japan's been a bit of a minnow team. So what is the vibe on the streets there? Do people actually know that this is about to happen?
Yeah, they do. It's not like, let's be honest, it's not the Olympics. There's not as much of a buzz as there will be next year for Tokyo 2020. Rugby is very much a minority sport in Japan, and a lot of people haven't really been exposed to it. But people are willing to learn, and I've been walking around the city, and you've got these horrible dirt fields everywhere, and there have been a bunch of people that obviously don't know what they're doing, playing touch rugby and trying to learn the game. You see, even the World Cup Organising Committee hold a match every Thursday night just down the road from where they're based, to try and get the guys in the organising committee that know nothing about rugby exposed to the game. So there is a buzz around here about rugby, and there certainly will be able to capitalise on the excitement that it brings. And Japan will be a wonderful host nation for this tournament. However, I don't think that they will be able to achieve what they want to in terms of bringing new players into the game on the back of this World Cup, because the JRFU is simply too conservative. They're not promoting the game enough, and they bury their heads in the sand, and they don't want things to change. They still think it's 1899. So I don't know if it'll be the boom for rugby in Asia that they hoped it would be, because unfortunately Japan is not a blank slate like other countries in Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. So over here, there's just too much bureaucracy in the way of the game moving forward.
And that's Joe Porter reporting from Tokyo there. On Checkpoint on RNZ National, dramatic scenes in Auckland as a seaplane crashes into the Waitemata Harbour. Armed police in Canterbury following a spike in shootings there and across the country. And when someone else's trash isn't another's treasure at all, the charity spending tens of thousands of dollars to dump junk masked as donated goods. As always, let us know what you're thinking, particularly on rugby, lime scooters and government departments snooping. Now, you can get in touch on text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Facebook is Checkpoint RNZ. But first, here's Susanna with headlines.
Lime will have to report to Auckland Council every 2 days about any problems with its e-scooters in New Zealand or overseas. The hire company has to agree to several conditions to enable it to reintroduce the scooters to Auckland streets. Lime also needs to provide fortnightly reports on its scooters, and Lime ambassadors will be policing their use. Documents released to Checkpoint have revealed secret conversations between the Department of Conservation and private investigation firm Thompson and Clark. Investigators were paid nearly $4,000 a month to spy on anti-1080 activists and then share the information through hidden channels on the messaging app Slack. The department has declined to be interviewed. Canterbury's frontline police officers will be carrying guns in response to a specific situation and will no longer do so once a warranted man is in custody. The man is being sought in relation to 2 shooting incidents in the city. The Canterbury District Commander John Price says as soon as the risk is over, the police will revert to normal firearm protocols. Subcontractors say they are the ones who will be hurt by Arrow International's financial troubles. Yesterday, the construction company announced it had gone into voluntary receivership. The managing director of Smith Crane and Construction, Tim Smith, says he has 4 cranes on 3 different Arrow sites. He says he's lost about $5 million over 8 years and the industry is badly structured. A man accused of scamming millions of dollars from a group of Chinese workers denies doing anything wrong. Peter, or Wen Chun Li, is being investigated by Immigration New Zealand after Chinese construction workers complained they paid him tens of thousands of dollars for a work visa, but did not get the work or pay they were promised. His lawyer says Mr. Li has filed a statement to the Employment Relations Authority. People in controlled areas on Auckland's North Shore face further restrictions on moving produce after the discovery of a 4th Queensland fruit fly. The male fly was found in a trap within Zone B in Northcote. Those are the headlines. I'll be back with more news at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Let's turn to business now. Madison Reddy's joined us. Madison, so first consumer confidence survey of the year. It's out. What does it say about what we're up to? Are we spending?
Yes, we are spending, and we feel pretty good about spending too, is what this survey said. So this was the ANZ Consumer Confidence Survey. So it fell just 1 point. It's pretty flat and steady at 121 for this month of February. And that's because consumers are feeling better about their own financial situation. So we and the rest of the country is apparently feeling better about their own finances. They say that it's a good time for them to buy big ticket items. That's typically furniture and whiteware as well. But they are still slightly worried about the future of the economy. Now that probably ties in with all of this talk about global economic conditions worsening when you look at Brexit stalling and also talk of the US-China trade war ongoing. Now when you compare that to the business confidence survey that we had yesterday, that was the first one of the year too. Now that actually showed that businesses are feeling a lot more gloomy than previously. So if you remember last year, this was a pretty big story. Businesses were largely upset for
the elephant in the room, as it was called.
The elephant in the room, which actually was addressed by the Prime Minister. I was there when she actually addressed it. So the businesses are feeling a little bit more gloomy again. So their index in February fell 7 points. Now that basically swallowed half of the gains that they actually made in December. So as we just mentioned, the elephant in the room was them feeling pretty upset last year. But heading into Christmas, they actually perked up. Now all of that is pretty much undone. And that's not just because they have less Christmas parties on their calendar. They actually say that it's because they're struggling to pass on their rising costs of doing business onto customers.
Interesting. Residential building consents. Well, this is interesting. They're at a 44-year high.
They are. So official figures from Statistics New Zealand came out today and said that the annual number of consents is the same as it was in 1975. So our annual consents issued are at 33,500 for the year to January. Now that's mostly for standalone houses as usual. Typically also more of those are in Auckland, but it does continue to be driven up by more townhouses, units and flats being consented there as well. Now, when Stats New Zealand actually broke down these numbers per capita compared to the mid-70s, it turns out that in the way back then there was actually only 3 million people in New Zealand. There's now nearly 5 million people in New Zealand. So when you actually break down the number of consents issued per capita, actually we only had about half the growth that we saw back then. So to be on par with where we actually were in the 70s, would need to be issuing about 70,000 building residential consents per year. That's twice as many as we issued in the year to January.
All right, so the packaging, the thing inside is not as good as the packaging, it would seem, when you crunch the numbers.
Exactly, and obviously those are just consents, not actually homes built, we should always point out.
Can't live in a consent, as I know someone likes to say. What's been happening on the markets today?
The NZX Top 50 Index closed up 0.25% tonight. That's 27 points to close at 9,352. And the New Zealand dollar is buying at 68.1 US cents, 96 to the Australian, and 51.4 British pence.
Thanks, Madison. Madison Reedy there with your business update. A pilot has managed to escape uninjured, if a little soggy, after his seaplane plunged into Auckland's Waitemata Harbour this morning. Horrified ferry passengers and office workers watched as the plane's usual landing took a turn for the worse. Sarah Robson has the details.
Mayday, Sailor B has advised seaplane Alpha just north of Wynyard Point.
A seaplane upside down at the Waitemata Harbour is the last thing ferry passengers expected to see on their cruise into the city. Just before 11 o'clock this morning, Stuart and Rachel McNell were on the West Harbour ferry watching the seaplane come into land. But then they noticed something a bit unusual.
I actually noticed that the wheels were down, which I thought was a bit odd. Hit the water and literally almost like slow motion did a cartwheel, and it was all a bit surreal. Did that really just happen?
Everyone on board the ferry was shocked by what they saw.
There was a lot of spray, and it just, I guess it bogged, and as it bogged, it just cartwheeled over. Kind of reminded me of the America's Cup when the boat. It was that kind of slow motion effect of the plane just going slowly over onto its back, I guess.
Kay Bramley saw the drama unfold from a different vantage point, the 17th floor of a nearby building.
Watched it come in and gradually get lower over the harbour, heading towards Harbour Bridge. Then it did a turn back towards the city. We did actually comment amongst ourselves. It was actually, came in quite sharply, if you like.
And then the seaplane hit the water.
A lot of water went up over the bow of the front of the plane, and then the plane just appeared to nosedive. And we just sort of all stood here quite speechless, wondering what we just witnessed.
Stuart McNell says nearby boats rushed to the scene.
A few smaller boats came out with people on board who had just literally stripped off and jumped in for mask on, and the cockpit of the plane was definitely well and truly underwater, so if someone was still strapped in there, they were not in a good position.
But the police confirmed the pilot, who was the only person on board, managed to escape uninjured. The seaplane is owned by the scenic flight company Auckland Seaplanes. In a statement, the company says it suspended its flight operations after the crash. It's working with the Civil Aviation Authority to figure out what happened. The Auckland Harbour Master is keeping a close eye on the plane while it remains upside down in the water. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
And if you're listening, that has got some amazing pictures in it, that piece from Sarah Robson, and they were filmed by Claire Easton Farrelly. It's going to go up on our website, so do check it out, man. It's fantastic that the pilot walked away unharmed. Canterbury Police have released the name of the man they're hunting for in relation to a shooting in a suburban Christchurch street last Saturday. Officers are appealing for 20-year-old Trek Allen to hand himself in and say around 40 frontline police will continue to keep a pistol on their hip until he does so. Police say the decision to remain armed is due to a heightened risk, but it's raised questions about how often New Zealand police could carry firearms in the future. Katie Todd reports.
Police in Canterbury have been on the hunt for a man since a shooting in Wainoni last Saturday, when officers were shot at from the window of a car. Today, Superintendent John Price fronted the media with a message for him.
I appeal to that individual to make contact with the police as soon as possible. I encourage him to come forward for his safety, the safety of our community, and the safety of our police officers.
It's not the only shooting Canterbury Police have been involved with this week. On Tuesday, officers exchanged shots with another wanted man on a suburban Christchurch street before he was taken to hospital. Police believe the two incidents are related and that the remaining wanted man could still be armed. Mr Price says that could pose a risk to officers who will be carrying pistols until he is tracked down, but no longer than that.
As soon as the circumstances change and we believe that this risk is no longer present, we will revert back to our normal operating model regarding the carriage of firearms.
Canterbury isn't the only place where shootings have happened this week. Just this morning in the Auckland suburb of Sandringham, residents described waking to the sound of gunshots.
There was a couple of shots. I was going, oh yeah. Next minute it was a whole round. It was like the whole round of whatever's in a barrel, whether it's 10 or... It was quite a lot actually. It was quite frightening.
Police Association President Chris Cahill says the situation in Christchurch could be the beginning of officers routinely carrying firearms right across the country.
Unless we do something about the number of firearms that fall into the hands of criminals, we could well end that way. Police officers would much rather it was safer and that they didn't have to carry firearms because of that risk, but it seems to be ever increasing.
But Mr Price says the decision to arm police, even if for a short time, is not a decision made lightly.
It is public knowledge that firearms are routinely available to our police staff, and this decision is in response to a very specific situation rather than a general shift in our approach.
Canterbury Police say if they do not locate the wanted man, they will be releasing his name and details to the public. In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, TNA.
And it's 6:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now, going to the dump isn't a pleasant experience for anyone, but even less so for the Red Cross, which is spending tens of thousands of dollars nationally to dump rubbish that isn't theirs. Rubbish, damaged clothing, broken items are just some of the donations delivered to the charity stores. Visual journalist Rebecca Parsons-King and reporter Charlotte Cook went to see the trash and treasures.
At the Red Cross storage unit in Wellington, David Crisp is working to clear the space of rubbish before he heads to the dump, a job he does frequently.
Probably twice a week, yeah, sometimes more depending if, like the other day I picked up a fridge and a washing machine and a dryer out the front of a shop that was left overnight and it didn't have a door on it, all the power cables were cut off and it was mouldy. Yeah, the rest is other rubbish. We get a lot of suitcases that just are like ripped and the zips don't work.
He says today's load is only a small one that's built up in one day of collections in Wellington. It's still made up of about 30 bags, bits of broken electrical equipment and clothing that looks covered in grease. All things that have been dropped in store as donations. David is on the front line. He works as a driver, collecting donations from homes and stores. He has the difficult job of telling people he can't take their broken, gross and very well-loved belongings because no one will want to buy them.
A lot of people are good, but then there are people who think we're rubbish too.
The Red Cross retail manager, Tanya O'Leary, has all sorts of horror stories from the carnage that's come through their doors. But getting people to understand what's an acceptable donation and what is just rubbish is the hard part. Stained mattresses, food, odd shoes, condoms and general trash end up becoming the Red Cross's problem.
If you think you could sell it on Trade Me, then it's worth donating.
People often treat the Red Cross like a dumping ground, and Tanya says on average between 20 to 40% of donations received won't be able to be resold. It's a common story to arrive at the entranceway littered with, well, litter.
Anything that's got a stained collar or smelly armpit, missing buttons, and might have a little tear in it, or, generally it hasn't washed up well or it hasn't got a long lifespan anyway, those things we can't resell. So we end up having to incur, the disposal fees for that type of product.
The Red Cross has 2 small warehouses. They're storage containers which are used for holding excess stock and rubbish. Tanya says the Red Cross sells over 1 million garments a year, but estimates around 70,000 items on top of that can't be sold. And getting rid of donations that aren't sellable comes at a huge cost to the charity's national budget.
Last year we spent in excess of $50,000 on disposal fees, which we struggle with the idea that we're having to pay for it because it was clearly never going to be a product that could be resold.
Tanya says it's like sending 50 grand to the tip, and there are many more deserving places the money could go.
We've had teams on the ground in Nelson, so it could have been supporting that work. The Christchurch earthquakes, that's eight years ago now, but we've only disbanded their teams recently.
Among the horror stories is a tale of a lady pulling up with a carload of 8 bags. It wasn't until closer inspection did the volunteers notice the smell of rotting food and pungent rubbish wafting from the donations. By this time, the lady had unloaded the bags and sped away.
Not one thing was saleable. Miraculously, they found a $20 note that was in a pocket or something somewhere, so at least she felt like we weren't, she could put that towards the cost of the trip to the dump.
Tanya says her volunteers and staff like Teresa work tirelessly to sort through donations and filter out people's rubbish.
So that's pretty stained all over, so that'll go to rag. So yeah, so this is what our volunteers will go through and check. That's all stained down the side there.
We get hiking boots that are still caked in mud, or we might have some heels or stilettos where this is all very worn and the soles are, completely down. So these are look like they're ready to go out, actually.
So getting a donation like that where things are worn down, they're not going to get a second life, are they?
No, not at all.
Not all trash is another man's treasure.
We had a situation the year before last where basically a whole lot of stock had been donated. I'm calling it stock, but amongst it were bags of food and rubbish and, kitchen things, and the shop was actually closed over a period of time, and there was a heat wave and all sorts of things. So can you imagine food and heat outside a store, over a period. Yeah, so it was really nasty, and unfortunately it was our staff that had to go and try and clean it up.
The Red Cross are always grateful for donations, which are always in need, but they want people to think about where their donations go and how that affects the wider operation in New Zealand.
Be mindful of what you're putting in the bags to come to the charities. Just be deliberate in it, and, no food waste would be great, But we like stuff that, beautiful things that come from your home that, aren't chipped or cracked or anything. But I think the key thing is just to remember someone else, we need things that someone else will buy.
Tanya is concerned by the rising textile pollution in New Zealand and says the Red Cross does everything they can to minimise what goes to the landfill by implementing free bins of things that can't be sold.
I mean, look, we recognise that there will always be an element of waste involved just by the nature of the business, but the scale that it's at the moment is, it's growing. We're trying to do good work for, New Zealand Red Cross, and in order to do that, we need good quality donations.
For Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
And White House officials are still insisting there could be more meetings with the North Korean leadership, despite the failure of this week's summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. There were some hopes for progress in denuclearising the Korean peninsula, but the summit collapsed over a disagreement about lifting economic sanctions. Now, the North Korean foreign minister says their position will not change, even if the US seeks further talks. The BBC's Kim Gittleson has the latest.
In Hanoi, it was a he said story, with the US and North Korea offering different explanations as to what led to the startling collapse of a second historic summit between the two nations. Here is President Donald Trump's version.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion. We had to walk away from that.
But in an impromptu late-night press conference, the North Korean delegation disputed Mr. Trump, saying the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, did in fact offer to shut down a key nuclear site in return for only some sanctions relief.
If the United States removes partial sanctions, namely removes the articles of sanctions that hamper the civilian economy and the livelihood of our people in particular, we will permanently and completely dismantle all the nuclear material production facilities, including plutonium and uranium, in the presence of US experts and by the joint work of technicians from both countries.
President Trump assured the leaders of South Korea and Japan that this didn't spell the end of all talks between the two countries, which was a sentiment echoed by North Korea's state news agency. But for now, President Trump's desire to broker a denuclearization agreement remains out of reach. And instead, both leaders are heading home empty-handed, leading one news site to suggest that it was time for the Trump-Kim buddy movie to end.
Kim Gittleson reporting. Love of a different kind is buzzing in the air on a rural property near Otaki, north of Wellington. Gary Milne and Penny Kerr-Hislop left the rat race a few years ago and decided to set up life in the country. However, before we pop the corks for Gary and Penny, it's actually the buzz of bees that go on in a small office turned science lab on their lifestyle block that caught our attention. Our visual journalist Rebecca Parsons-King and reporter Jonathan Mitchell take up the story.
The sound of thousands of bees fills the air at Penny and Gary's rural retreat just off State Highway 1, a few kilometres north of Otaki. With our bee suits at the ready, Penny and Gary take us into their lab, where the real magic happens.
So she's ready for the lab?
She's ready for the lab.
Yep.
It's there where in a small covered hatch we see male drone bees flying around. Penny carefully picks one up and extracts the semen, while at the same time the bee dies and it's put in the bin. Its work is done. She takes the small blob and stores it away. That process is repeated a few more times until there's enough to inseminate the queen.
But it's got this little tiny brown bit there, and that's the semen, and then the white is what holds the semen. And that is like cement. You don't want to get that into your pipette, but that semen is what you want to extract.
Now it's time for the queen to be knocked out with CO2 and inseminated with the drone sperm. The small lab fills with anticipation that the insemination goes well. It all goes to plan. The queen then goes back in her small holder and into an incubator for rest. It will be more than a week before we find out if the insemination is successful.
What's your success rate like at the moment?
At the moment, in terms of attrition from insemination, it's about 99%. I've lost one queen, I think, in the last 3 months. I'm getting really good at it. Yeah, I'm getting really good at it.
They say it's important to produce them in a lab instead of letting nature take its course.
Choosing the good laying stock. There's choosing the colour. You can make your bees look more Italian or more. Can you get this word right? Carniolan. And we specialise in Italian, so we like to choose a nice yellow, golden coloured drone to inseminate with.
However, there's been a lot of trial and error.
A friend in the States has called me the inseminatrix. Yeah, just because of what I do, inseminate queens.
Because I first saw you today, you're a pro at it, But
oh, thank you. Yeah, well, it was a lot of tears and sweat and tantrums, and it's like anything you do. It's sort of, it's often much tougher than you think.
Penny went to Britain and the United States to learn the process.
Every time the queen sort of flinched, I would flinch and I'd say, I'm so sorry, I hope I didn't hurt you, and I'd make sure that gas was on. And I think if I'd stayed like that, I wouldn't have been able to continue to do it. I now see it more objectively as it's something I need to do. I need to do it properly. I need to make sure she does survive. I need to make sure that she doesn't get hurt, and I need to do it as well as I can.
And for Gary, it's about the lifestyle.
We keep bees because we love doing it. Apart from the occasional sting, bees don't really argue with you or lose their temper with you or tell you what to do.
He takes us to see a brood of offspring from an earlier insemination. There's bees still waiting to come to life.
So this has got baby bees in it. So you can see
all those orange dots.
Each one of these is a baby bee. So there she is there. So you can see she's got a number on her, number 4. She'll lay for 2 years. She'll be the head of a hive with 20 or 50,000 bees. In the height of the season, she'll lay 2,000 to 3,000 eggs a day, day in, day out.
Now that they've had a successful run of producing their own Italian queen bees in the lab, their next step is to go commercial and sell them to other beekeepers here and overseas.
We're not selling them yet. We have a large number sitting in hives at the moment, and we are going to carry them through the winter.
You get grumpy hives and you get happy hives, and we don't want to have grumpy bees, and we don't want to sell queens that may have grumpy offspring.
And Penny, who's a trained teacher, wants to put those skills and knowledge she's gained to good use and teach others the process in the years to come. Near Otaki for Checkpoint, called Jonathan Mitchell, tēnā.
And Jonathan's story will go up on our webpage. Do have a look at the pictures there as well, if only to see Jonathan Mitchell dressed as a beekeeper. Bit of time for your feedback now. On World Rugby's plan to shut out the Pacific teams, Dee says, let's ditch the World Rugby Association. Let's start up our own Pacific League with New Zealand, Australia, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa and potentially Japan, USA, Argentina and South Africa. European teams, Dee says, can just take a hike. And Gail says New Zealand Rugby are hypocrites. They never bothered promoting any Pacific Island teams in the Super Rugby competition either, but they're happy to scalp them as teenagers. Do keep your feedback coming. After 6, we're going to be looking at what's an affordable house in Wanaka.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Lime will have to report to Auckland Council every 24 hours about any problems with its e-scooters in Auckland or 48 hours anywhere else. It's one of many new conditions Lime has agreed to allow it to reintroduce the green scooters to Auckland streets. A council spokesperson, Dean Kimpton, says Lime has owned up to the extent of its braking problem, but the council should have known about it sooner.
I've also reiterated to them our disappointment that we learned about this through the media. We require them to report to us more regularly. That subject's been discussed with them, and I know it's certainly been a topic in the media, and they've undertaken to address that.
Dean Kimpton says Lime also needs to provide fortnightly reports on its scooters, and Lime ambassadors will be policing their use. The electric scooters could be back on Auckland streets as early as tomorrow, provided Lime confirms its agreement on stricter conditions in writing. And Lime scooters could also return to Dunedin streets for the weekend. A City Council spokesperson, Simon Pickford, says Dunedin plans to follow Auckland's lead after Lime representatives verbally agreed to several maintenance and safety conditions. Mr Pickford says as soon as there is written confirmation, Lime scooters will be back on Dunedin streets. It's expected that will be early tomorrow morning. Documents released to Checkpoint have revealed secret conversations between the Department of Conservation and private investigation firm Thompson and Clark. Investigators were paid nearly $4,000 a month to spy on anti-1080 activists and then share the information through hidden channels on the messaging app Slack. One anti-1080 activist who was under surveillance from Thompson and Clark, Carol Sawyer, is not impressed.
It's very concerning, but more concerning is the fact that we were not able to access that information.
Carol Sawyer. The department has declined to be interviewed. The State Services Commission has accepted a police apology for failing to investigate a complaint it laid in December last year. The complaint concerned potentially illegal recordings of people with insurance claims from the Christchurch earthquakes. Here's our political reporter John Gerritsen.
The complaint followed the Commission's investigation of state agencies' use of private security contractors and centred on recordings made by Thompson and Clark Investigations Limited for Southern Response, the Crown company dealing with some of the quake insurance claims. But the Deputy Police Commissioner, National Operations, Mike Clement, says he did not action the complaint and has apologised. The State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes, says he's pleased the case will now be investigated and the apology is the end of the matter. Atu i te whare paremata, ko John Gerritsen aho.
Canterbury's police superintendent says his frontline officers are carrying pistols in response to a specific situation, not as part of a new approach. The police in Christchurch will be carrying firearms in holsters as well as in their cars until a wanted man is arrested or hands himself in. They have just named him as 20-year-old Trake Allen, who is being sought after another wanted man shot at police on Anzac Drive last Saturday morning. He's being urged to hand himself in. The District Commander Superintendent John Price says it's public knowledge that firearms are already routinely available to police staff. He says local officers will carry guns only until the current risk is over, then they will go back to normal firearm protocols. A man being investigated by Immigration New Zealand for bringing a group of Chinese workers here says he has done nothing wrong. About 50 construction workers say they each paid Peter, or Wenshan Lee, around $45,000 for a work visa, but they never got the work or pay they were promised. Mr. Lee denies he has received any payment from the workers and claims he was recruiting them for a labour hire company, National Personnel Limited. His lawyer, Adam Simpringham, says Mr. Lee has responded to the complaints.
In summary, he denies the allegations that the workers have made. He's refuted that in a statement of reply that we have filed on his behalf in the Employment Relations Authority. And because the matter is before the Employment Relations Authority, I don't really want to be drawn on any of the detail in it.
Adam Simpringham, RNZ, has asked Peter Lee for an interview several times, but he has not responded. It's hoped the opening of Dunedin cycleway today marks the end of rising tensions between drivers and cyclists. The contentious $8 million separated path, which runs along Central and North Dunedin State Highway system, was officially opened this morning. The project has caused consternation for motorists and cyclists alike. But Dunedin's Deputy Mayor Chris Staines says the cycleway is needed as the city's streets become more congested.
Maybe we've been lucky. We've been a backwater city where we never get held up at the lights, there's never any roadworks, but now that our economy is moving more quickly and we have some major projects starting to head into the city, I think we just have to accept we're going to have some impediments in moving around the city from time to time.
Chris Staines says change was necessary after cyclists died on the road in 2011 and 2012. It's 6:05. Pacific rugby nations wouldn't be up to competing in a proposed new World League, says New Zealand rugby boss Steve Tew, but they need a pathway to join. Tew says several proposals are on the table, including the 12-team World League made up of the 4 rugby championship teams, along with Japan, the United States and the 6 nations teams in a round-robin competition. The proposal doesn't include Fiji, Samoa or Tonga, but Tew says it's not simply about including teams on a ranking basis.
So if, for example, Fiji are ranked high enough to come in, how are they going to access their players? Have we got enough resources in behind them? Because we all know you can't run an international team unless you've got a competition structure underneath it to feed your depth. Going from playing 3 or 4 games a year, which we all know is an issue for these countries, to playing in something like the Rugby Championship and then touring in the north for 3 to 5 weeks requires a player depth that a lot of countries struggle with, frankly.
In Super Rugby tonight, the Hurricanes host the ACT Brumbies in Palmerston North. The Black Caps continue to build a commanding first innings lead on day 2 of the first cricket test against Bangladesh in Hamilton. A short time ago, the home side was 425 for 3, a lead of 191. Jeet Raval scored his maiden test century, making 132, while fellow opener Tom Latham also made triple figures with 161. Skipper Kane Williamson is unbeaten on 80. Defending series champion New Zealand Scott McLaughlin has posted the fastest time at practice ahead of qualifying for the Supercars opening round in Adelaide. McLaughlin in his new Ford Mustang finished ahead of Holden rivals Jamie Whincup and Shane Van Gisbergen. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, long-time friend of Donald Trump, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Chloe Phillips-Harris on her extreme equestrianism, 1,000 kilometres across Mongolia, for example. And David Ireland on his very funny, very dark plays. Join me, Ken Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for the whole of the North Island except Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay. Fine in most places, but a few areas of cloud and isolated showers about Northland. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods, showers developing tomorrow morning, then becoming isolated in the evening. All of the South Island except Clutha, Southland and Southern Fiordland, fine, but some cloudy periods about eastern areas tomorrow. For Clutha, Southland and Southern Fiordland, a few showers today, especially about the coast, mainly fine tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. It's 8 minutes past 6 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Lime e-scooters could be back on Auckland streets tomorrow after the council lifted its suspension over a software defect. And it could usher in another wave of e-scooters from other companies who want to launch their own in the coming weeks. Jordan Bond reports.
The scooters are back.
Having reviewed this information today, we've made the decision to lift Lime's suspension. Once Lime agrees to the following conditions, and I'll share those with you shortly, then that lifting of the suspension will become effective.
That's Auckland Council's Chief Operating Officer, Dean Kimpton. He met with Lime today and told the company what it has to do to keep operating in the city. It must report within 24 hours every single serious or significant incident that happens in Auckland on their product. Every e-scooter must be mechanically inspected every week, and those reports have to be available to the council on request.
It's contingent on Lime agreeing unequivocally to all these conditions. Their thinking was that if they agree to that tonight, they could start re-emerging back on the streets tomorrow.
The scooters have been packed in a warehouse in Kingsland for a week, after the council suspended them because of a software problem. The glitch caused the wheels to lock up unexpectedly, which in some cases threw people over the handlebars and injured them.
I've spoken directly with Lime regarding our disappointment that these safety issues came to our attention through the media, and expressed our concern that was not good enough. We don't know what we don't know, and we expect to be told when these issues occur.
Both Lime and a third-party examiner have assured the council the bug has been fixed. Other e-scooter companies have been waiting in the wings and watching how this episode has unfolded. Mr. Kimpton says they have spoken to the council and indicated they could launch in the next few weeks. And if the streets are flooded with more, the injuries could pile up. Auckland man Fuz El-Hili says that's just the risk you take.
If you're going to go onto a motorised vehicle with two wheels on a thin plank of metal with nothing but a stick with handlebars to protect yourself, then there's a reasonable chance that you might mess up and hurt yourself. If the software's working fine, the hardware's working fine, and you mess up, that's on you, buddy.
Others are just happy to have them back, like Rohit Nair, even if it just means less effort than using the Onzo push bikes.
Onzo, you have to be physically fit to drive the cycle, and you need to drive it a lot. But while using Lime scooter, you can just push it up and go to the place where you're going to. Yeah, I'm pretty happy because I used to use it a lot.
Lime has verbally agreed to the conditions but still has to confirm in writing to Auckland Council. Once that happens, expect a speedy comeback onto the city's streets. I tamaki makoto mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, tēnei.
Wanaka's housing market is booming and affordable housing is in high demand. But why are 5 out of 10 KiwiBuild homes sitting empty? More than 200 KiwiBuild homes have been earmarked for Wanaka's North Lake subdivision, with the expectation they'll be built in the next 2 years. The original 10 were offered in a ballot, but only 5 have sold since October. Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton spoke to residents to find out if the KiwiBuild houses really are affordable.
Queenstown Lakes District Councillor Quentin Smith says he thought there would be more of a demand for KiwiBuild homes.
Clearly there is a housing affordability crisis. That's plainly obvious to everyone. It's an incredibly expensive place to be. So it is surprising that it hasn't been more uptake of the KiwiBuild, but I suppose my personal feeling is that people don't necessarily perceive it as good value for money in terms of what they get for what they're paying.
The North Lake KiwiBuild homes cost between $565,000 and $650,000 for a 2 to 3 bedroom house. But they're competing with other houses on the market in the Queenstown Lakes District. 2 years ago, the council predicted Wanaka needed 4,300 homes by 2048 to cater for projected growth. Former Queenstown Lakes District Deputy Mayor Lyle Cox was one of the commissioners who approved the North Lake plan change years before KiwiBuild entered the picture.
There's a lot of areas that have come up for development now and are being developed by 3 or 4 developers. This ranges from some in Wanaka, but then you've got Lake Hawea, Luggett and a little bit in Hawea Flats that may be more attractive than maybe the KiwiBuild ones that are on offer at North Lake.
Mr Cox says many of those subdivisions are offering more floor space than the KiwiBuild's average of 87.5 square metres. Renee Heistack and her partner bought their first home through KiwiBuild and says it was an easy and stress-free option.
If we were to build ourselves or we were to find our own house, it would have taken a lot longer. If you were a stickler on your details of your new house, it wouldn't have worked for you, but we were like, I don't want to make those decisions. This is obviously going to be a nice house. It was just...
Julie Scott says $600,000 isn't affordable and the 5 empty homes are a testament to that. The Trust clients have an average gross household income of about $70,000 and on average have a first home deposit of $30,000.
Typically, the average household simply can't afford that. When I look at our waiting list of close to...
Families are still being left out in the cold.
I think the big hole in Wanaka is people that can't afford a home of any sort. They have not got enough income to get into the KiwiBuild. They haven't even got enough income to get into the community housing scheme. There's nothing available to rent at decent value, and there's certainly...
KiwiBuild are more likely to try their luck on the open market, and on top of that, speculators are moving in to make a profit.
I think the situation in Wanaka, if you look around, to me it looks like a gold rush. There's a huge property market, there's a huge market in speculation, and people...
When cyclists and motorists. But that's exactly what they've been after. And although neither group got exactly what they want, authorities have been saying since 2017 that it's the only viable option. The rising bitterness between the groups has even led to the coining of a new term, bike-lash. But at the official opening for the cycleway, which runs 2.5 kilometres between Queen's Gardens and the Dunedin Botanic Garden, Dunedin's Deputy Mayor Chris Staines says he hopes today marks the beginning of the healing of the rift.
Nobody likes change. Whatever change you do, it upsets people. So I think now that the change is done, the system's in place, people will get used to it, and that backlash, if you like, will die down.
But the change was not sparked from some bureaucratic navel-gazing or green-minded do-gooders. The 2012 death of Dunedin doctor Lee Hong Chris He was the catalyst. He was run over by a stock truck outside Dunedin Hospital in 2012. Chris Staines says something drastic was needed.
When you look at the fact that we've had 3 deaths on our state highway system within the city and a number of serious accidents, there was only one sensible answer, and that was to face up to the fact that we needed those separated lanes.
The Deputy Mayor reminded people at the opening of the once treacherous conditions on the one-way network.
Many people have told us that they want to cycle, but simply don't feel safe hopping on a bike in the central city, and I'm certainly one of those. I think it's one way to commit suicide.
Dunedin North MP Dr David Clark officially opened the cycleway route and set off on a bike ride around the southernmost stretch of the network.
We do need to do better as a country in making walking, cycling and other environmentally friendly modes of transport safer for everyone concerned.
But it's another project within his purview which is acting as the billion-dollar elephant in the room, or in this case on the highway. The Dunedin Hospital rebuild will be straddled by the cycleways to the east and the west. So are we only 5 years away from ripping up the $8 million project and starting anew? The Transport Agency's South Island Regional Relationships Director, Jim Harland, did not indicate that was the plan, but he wouldn't rule it out either.
The crucial point is that no decisions have been made. We've got to look at that from all the users' perspectives, because in the centre of the city there are bus users, there's walking folk, there's cycling folk and there's car drivers. So any future design and redesign of the network needs to accommodate all those users.
But the most likely option currently on the table is the return of two-way traffic to the one-way system. Mr Harlan says, fortuitously, the cycleway's design means they aren't fixed in place.
If any of those one-way systems become two-ways, then you've got to figure out, can you leave a cyclist on the two-way bit? Those sorts of details will be worked through in the future, but the concrete elements have been designed so they're actually bolted into the pavement. So if you decided to move them, then you can unbolt them and move them. They're not lost.
Whether the completion of the one-way cycleway project marks the end of Dunedin's bike lash remains to be seen. What is known is that the days of traffic control and road realignment are far from over in the central city. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Stained mattresses, ripped clothes and containers still with food inside are just some of the items charity stores are being forced to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars dumping. So is the current decluttering craze sparked by a Japanese tidying guru the problem, or is it the way people are consuming? Here's the second part of Charlotte Cook's investigation.
Over the summer, a new craze has prompted more cleaning than usual. Book and Netflix series Marie Kondo and the life-changing magic of tidying up. Marie Kondo tells people to ask if all of their possessions spark joy. If the item fills you with happiness, keep it. If it doesn't, it goes. Lee Seve a self-confessed convert, has cleansed herself of clutter and is committed to living a more bioconscious life.
When I did my hallway cupboard, because I just pulled everything out of the hallway cupboard, and when it was all laid bare out in the hallway, I said, I feel embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that we have this much stuff.
Mrs. Sevier is just one of many who've been condoed, but as more people declutter, charity stores are being inundated with donations in an already busy time of year. While Mrs. Sevier says she was mindful about her donations, not everyone takes as much care, and charity stores are taking the heat as a secondary dump zone. Red Cross retail manager Tanya O'Leary says while donations are always needed, not everything is usable.
I was in a shop this morning. My shop coordinator just said, and apparently 2 days ago it wasn't there, and now we can't get to the stock and things. So all of that has to be sorted through, and we might be lucky if 50% is saleable.
The cost of taking those unsellable items to landfill falls on the charity.
For 2 or 3.
This message is echoed by Tearfund's Educational and Advocacy Manager, Claire Hart. She says people are buying and discarding poor quality clothing at a high rate, making things harder for donation stores.
So this idea we have about donating stuff and then it getting used again is actually a little bit misconceived.
As for Lee Sevier, she says decluttering her home has made her more conscious about what she buys.
It made me think what we actually need as a family as opposed to the things that we want. Like a lot of those things we purchase just in the spur of the moment because we saw it and we wanted it. So our spending has changed a lot since then as well.
Claire Hart says it's important to remember the environmental, ethical and economical ramifications before buying and donating items. For Checkpoint, this is Charlotte Cook.
After 8 years of renovations and repairs, the Christchurch Town Hall is preparing to host its first post-quake concert this evening. Drum and bass band Shapeshifter have headed home to team up with Christchurch Symphony Orchestra for the historic occasion. 13 years after doing it the first time around, RNZ Concerts' Zoe George reports.
Classical music and drum and bass are two music genres that don't often combine, but it's the perfect partnership for the opening gig at the renovated Christchurch Town Hall. Shapeshifter guitarist Sam Trevithick grew up in the city. He says christening the Town Hall with the orchestra is something special.
Right from the start I was being taken here to all sorts of concerts and what have you, so I'm really familiar with this venue as a patron, and we're lucky enough to have performed here a few times as well in a few different capacities, so it's kind of like coming home and it's all shiny and new and looking and sounding amazing, so we're really happy.
Christchurch Symphony Orchestra CEO Gretchen LaRoche says it was the obvious choice to have Shapeshifter open with the orchestra.
Oh, look, they're just, a wonderful bunch of Christchurch musicians, fantastic music. We loved playing with them back in 2006. It seemed like a great idea to have them in. Friday night, dance, orchestra, band, what can be better? It's wonderful to be back in the centre, in the heart of the city, a central place that hopefully everyone across the city can get to. It's a venue that holds a really special place in the hearts of many people, and it's just, frankly, it's great to be back.
Benjamin Northey will conduct this evening's show. For him, tonight is history in the making.
It's pretty exciting and very historic, so we're all looking forward to tonight and tomorrow as well. Bringing two different worlds of music together. Fortunately, Shapeshifter are great musicians, and that makes that collaboration a lot easier. Sonically, we're working in very different worlds. It's a very loud band, and we're an orchestra. We like to think we're quite loud too, but we're not that loud. So just bringing the two things together in synchronisation, that's my challenge, that's my job, to bridge the worlds together.
Music arranger Hamish Oliver had the tough job of balancing the band and the orchestra.
When the band are full on in a section going for it, then I think you're wanting, if you want to add anything, high frequencies is what you need. So tinkly metallic percussion is nice, or high violins, but you don't want to hear that all the time. So maybe just give the band a go for a while, and then when the orchestra can be heard, start mixing it a bit more.
Tonight's performance is sold out, but music fans will have another chance to hear the CSO when they perform The Phoenix. It will be broadcast live on RNZ Concert from 7:30 on Saturday night. For Checkpoint, Zoe George Tene.
A year ago, Taranaki woman Erica Perry set herself the goal of completing the Mountain to Surf half marathon, an impressive journey from the base of Mount Taranaki right to the wild west coast. For many of us, that would be daunting enough of a task, but Erica lives with Miller's syndrome. It's a rare genetic condition which has affected the development of her face and limbs. Our Taranaki Wanganui reporter Robin Martin caught up with her ahead of race day.
Immediately after completing the 2018 half marathon as part of a team, Erica put down a marker and said she would finish it by herself this year. The 33-year-old Inglewood resident doesn't make such pledges lightly, and that's despite the many challenges she faces.
Doctors told me when I was little, told my parents when I was little, I might not ever walk or run or write or talk or all those things. You know how they don't know you as a person. But luckily my parents decided that they would just treat me just like my sister and I would do everything she did and I just had to keep up. And if she's tying shoelaces, you will too. And I just got on with life.
Miss Perry said she hated cross-country at school because she feared being made fun of and knew she would finish last.
Now I do it for me, for my own enjoyment. It clears my mind. I've been training hard for a year. And I've come to the realisation that it doesn't matter if you're last, because as long as you're first in your heart, you feel like you've aced it, you've got to the finish line, that's winning. Getting to the finish line is winning.
Andy Walmsley, one of Erica's team of trainers, is blown away by her mental toughness.
She's an absolute inspiration. From the moment we met, going back a few months ago when Park Run started up at the East End, she's inspired so many runners with her attitude, and it's can-do attitude. That's what Erica's about, what she can do. There's never any mention of what she can't do. It's all about what she's going to do next and how she's going to conquer various barriers.
But Mr. Walmsley is under no illusions about the challenge awaiting Erica tomorrow. He reckons she'll need about 4 hours to complete the 21-kilometre course.
It's not easy for her. She's got very small feet. Is it one toe and 1 foot, Erica, and 2 on the other, which doesn't make it easy to run. She's got the size of feet that children have at the age of 12 or so. So conquering these distances is a real struggle, and she's done it. She's trained hard, she's worked hard, and she's pushed herself.
Erica spoke to kids at Franklin Primary School today about her journey. Her message was not lost on Molly Kosh.
So Molly, how did you find Erica's speech this morning?
Really inspirational. It's because she's different to us, and she said that she's a little different on the outside, but we're all the same on the inside.
And how do you think she'll go?
I'm pretty sure she'll do really good.
Greer Parks was also impressed.
What most impressed you about what she's trying to achieve?
How she just said that it doesn't matter if you're first or last or how you are, it's just on the inside.
And how do you reckon she'll go tomorrow?
Really good. Yeah.
Has it inspired you?
Yeah.
And if you think Erica's done at 21 kilometres, think again.
There's already been talks of achieving a marathon. How long that will take, I don't know, but it's my next goal to keep me fit and healthy and active.
Erica will be joined by about 300 other runners across the marathon and half-marathon distances when she takes to the start line tomorrow. I Taranaki mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin aho.
And some time for your feedback now on DOC and the use of Thompson and Clark to monitor 1080 protesters and activists. This listener says 1080 protesters have threatened DOC staff, tampered with their vehicles and made false claims, including that dead native birds dumped at Parliament were killed by 1080. DOC has a duty to protect its staff. It should make no apology for monitoring anti-1080 activists. But Francis has a completely different point of view. Francis says, having been spied on by Thompson and Clark in the past, I find DOC's continued justification of their unethical behaviour appalling. DOC does good work in many areas, but that does not give them the right to slander their opponents as threatening. Everyone should have the right to oppose government policy without being surveilled, says Francis. On the subject of Lime scooters, Bob in Te Aratu says, the safety of Lime scooters is a red herring. The real problem is the safety of pedestrians when powered vehicles are allowed to travel at speeds of more than 20 kilometres an hour on the footpath. And Liz says that the council shouldn't rely on Lime to be self-reporting, and says there must be a better way to keep records of incidents. And also, what about the pedestrians? So she shares the same view as Bob in some ways. On op shops, people dumping the trash at charity shops, this person says same situation with churches and op shops. Bring back inorganic collection. That's all we've got time for tonight. Good luck, Erica Perry, on your half marathon tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Documents released to RNZ have revealed secret conversations between Doc and private investigators Thompson and Clark. The police in Christchurch have named a man wanted over a shooting in Wainoni on Saturday as 20-year-old Trake Allen. Lime scooters could be back in both Auckland and Dunedin streets this weekend if the company agrees in writing to new maintenance and safety conditions. And a man being investigated by immigration officials in relation to Chinese workers who say they paid him thousands of dollars for a work visa denies the allegations. Our next news will be at 7.
RNZ National, with a fresh take on the day's news at 10 every weeknight with Karen Hay.
There's a warmth that we have. Now, I hope that stays. I think it will.
Including the latest national and international news from the RNZ News team.
Frontline officers usually have firearms available in their cars, but will now carry pistols.
And always live when